I thought the worst thing about being betrayed was losing the woman you love. Turns out, it's seeing yourself turned into fiction and recognizing every ugly detail she got right about you. Sometimes you don't realize you're living in someone else's story until you read the final draft. The truth hits different when it's printed on paper, bound between covers, selling for $20 on Amazon. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers who wanted other men to know what really happens when you become someone's inspiration. I was sitting in this dive bar on Khao San Road, nursing my third Chang beer and watching backpackers stumble around like lost children. At 57, I felt ancient among all those gap-year kids with their matching tattoos and Instagram stories. The divorce papers were still fresh in my suitcase back at the hotel, along with what was left of my retirement fund after Sarah took her half. Oklahoma felt like a different planet now, all that oil field dust and empty space I'd left behind. I was just another broken American man running away to Thailand, looking for something I couldn't name. That's when I saw her. Camel Porn was sitting alone at a corner table, completely absorbed in her laptop, fingers flying across the keys with this intense focus I hadn't seen since my engineering days. She had this way of biting her lower lip when she concentrated, and every few minutes she'd pause to take notes in a small journal beside her computer. Unlike the bar girls who immediately spotted foreign men as walking ATMs, she didn't even glance up when I approached her table. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. She looked up briefly, annoyed at the interruption. "I'm working," she said, then went back to typing. Most Thai women I'd encountered were either overly friendly or politely distant, but Camel Porn seemed genuinely irritated by my presence. It made me want to stay. "What kind of work?" I pressed, sliding into the chair anyway. She sighed, the way people do when they realize you're not going away. "I'm writing a novel about American men in Thailand." The irony hit me immediately. "Well," I said, signaling the waitress for another beer, "I could give you plenty of material." For the first time, she really looked at me. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was something else there too, curiosity maybe. "Maybe you already have," she said, and that small smile changed everything. We talked for 2 hours, not the usual expat conversation about visa runs and cheap massages, but real talk. She told me she was 28, from Udon Thani originally, working freelance writing jobs to support her fiction. Her English was perfect, better than most Americans I knew back home. She'd studied literature at Chulalongkorn University and had been trying to publish internationally for 3 years. "Thai writers don't get taken seriously in the West unless we write about bar girls and poverty," she explained. "I want to write something real, something that shows both sides of these relationships." I found myself telling her about my divorce, about 30 years in the oil fields, about feeling invisible and disposable at my age. She listened with this intensity that made me feel important, asking follow-up questions that showed she was really paying attention. When she agreed to have dinner with me the next night, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my marriage fell apart. Genuine hope. The next evening, we met at a small cafe in Silom. What was supposed to be a quick dinner stretched into 4 hours of the most honest conversation I'd had with anyone in years. Camel Porn ordered pad thai, but barely touched it, too busy asking me questions about my life back home. "Tell me about Oklahoma," she said, leaning forward with that same intense focus I'd seen at her laptop. "Not the tourist version, the real version." So I did. I told her about growing up in Tulsa, about my father who drank too much and hit too hard, about dropping out of community college to work oil rigs when I was 22 because we needed the money. I told her about Sarah, how we met at a church dance when we were both young and stupid, how 35 years of marriage just slowly drained away until we were strangers living in the same house. She said I was emotionally unavailable. I confessed, surprised at my own honesty. Said I never really let her know me. Camel Porn took notes while I talked, writing in a small journal she kept beside her coffee cup. "It's for my research," she explained when she noticed me watching. I want to capture authentic American voice patterns for my novel. I was flattered. Here was this intelligent, educated woman finding value in my mundane life experiences. "What about you?" I asked. "What's your story?" She told me about growing up poor in northeastern Thailand, about her father's gambling debts and her mother's cleaning jobs. She'd won a scholarship to university in Bangkok and never looked back, but the city was expensive and competitive. Writing was her passion, but it didn't pay the bills. "I want to bridge cultures with my work," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "To show that people are people, regardless of where they come from." Her touch was electric. "You're fascinating," she continued, "complex. Most Western men I meet here are so simple, but you have depth, real experience." I believed every word. When we kissed outside the cafe that night, I felt 25 again. She tasted like jasmine tea and possibilities, and for the first time since my divorce, I thought maybe I could be happy again. "I'd like to see you tomorrow," she whispered against my ear. "If you want." I wanted. More than I'd wanted anything in years. 3 weeks later, I was helping Kamalporn move her things into my rented apartment in Thonglor. It happened so naturally I didn't even question it. She'd mentioned that her landlord was raising her rent, that she couldn't afford the increase on her freelance income. "You have all this space," she said, gesturing around my 2-bedroom place, "and I could cook for you, help with expenses." The logical part of my brain knew it was too fast, but the lonely part was louder. Besides, she made me feel needed in ways I'd forgotten existed. She moved in with just 2 suitcases and her laptop, but she transformed the space immediately. Suddenly there were fresh flowers on the kitchen table and the smell of lemongrass and chili from her cooking. She'd commandeered the spare bedroom as her writing space, setting up her computer by the window where the light was best. "I work better with ambient noise," she explained, so I'd tell her stories while she typed. Stories about oil rig accidents and winter mornings in Oklahoma, about my mother's death and my first marriage that ended when I was 31. She was endlessly curious about American working-class life, asking detailed questions about union politics and small-town dynamics, about what it felt like to work with your hands for 30 years. "It's research," she'd remind me when I wondered why she cared so much about my boring past. "You're helping me create authentic characters." I was proud to be part of her artistic process. In the evenings, we'd explore Bangkok together, visiting temples and night markets. But I noticed she was always observing, always taking mental notes. She started carrying a small digital recorder, asking if she could capture my voice while I told stories. "Your accent, your speech patterns, they're perfect for my protagonist," she explained. I agreed happily, thinking I was helping her create something beautiful. At night, we made love with a passion I hadn't experienced since my 20s. She'd whisper that I was her muse, that I was inspiring her masterpiece. For the first time since my divorce became final, I felt truly alive, truly valuable to someone. When I caught her typing late at night after I'd gone to bed, she'd smile and say she was riding a wave of inspiration. "You've unlocked something in me creatively," she'd tell me. I'd never been anyone's muse before. It felt incredible. We settled into what felt like perfect domestic harmony. My days had structure and purpose for the first time since retirement. Mornings, I'd make coffee and sit quietly while Kamalporn wrote, her fingers moving across the keyboard with machine-like precision. The sound became comforting, a rhythm that marked the beginning of each day. She was incredibly disciplined, writing for 4 hours straight without breaks. "Tell me about the oil rig explosion," she'd say, without looking up from her screen. "The one where your friend died." So I'd tell her about Bobby Martinez, about the blowout that killed him and 2 others, about the months of nightmares afterward. She typed while I talked, occasionally stopping to ask for more specific details. What did the flames look like? How did it sound when the metal buckled? Her questions were so precise, so visual. I assumed she was creating authentic scenes for her novel. I was happy to help. It felt therapeutic to finally tell these stories to someone who understood their value. In the afternoons, we'd venture out into Bangkok's chaos. She'd drag me to art galleries and poetry readings, introducing me to her writer friends as her American research partner. I liked being part of Bangkok's creative community, even peripherally. Kamalporn knew everyone: struggling novelists, newspaper journalists, university professors. They'd speak Thai around me most of the time, but occasionally someone would ask about my experiences in English. "Hank has the most incredible stories," Kamalporn would say proudly. "Real American, working-class experiences that you can't find in books." She started recording our conversations more frequently, explaining that she wanted to capture my natural speaking voice for dialogue purposes. "Publishers love authentic voice," she told me, "and your voice is so genuine, so unfiltered." In bed, she'd asked me to tell her about my childhood, about my father's violence, about the shame I felt when Sarah called me boring and predictable during our divorce proceedings. "I need to understand your psychology," she'd whisper afterward, "to write you authentically." I thought she meant to write characters like me. I was honored to be her inspiration. By our third month together, something started to shift. Kamalporn's questions became more clinical, more targeted. She'd wake me up at night wanting to know exact details about specific traumas, the precise words my father used when he beat me, the exact conversations Sarah and I had the night she asked for a divorce, the feelings I experienced when my mother died of cancer when I was 38. "I need the emotional truth," she'd insist when I tried to give general answers. "Readers can sense when details aren't authentic." Her intensity about these painful memories started making me uncomfortable. It felt less like loving curiosity and more like data mining. She began taking phone calls in Thai, stepping onto the balcony or into the bathroom for privacy. When I asked about them, she'd say it was just her publisher friend giving feedback on her manuscript. "He's very demanding about cultural accuracy," she'd explain. But something in her voice had changed. It was more guarded, more careful. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way she'd quickly minimize her laptop screen when I entered the room. The stack of printed pages she kept in her dresser drawer, hidden under her clothes. The way she'd steer conversations. Back to my past whenever I tried to ask about her work or her family. "I'm superstitious about discussing unfinished projects," she'd say when I asked to read her novel. "But I promise you'll be the first to see it when it's done." The romantic haze that had clouded my judgment for months was finally clearing. In its place was a growing unease I couldn't articulate. I loved Kamalporn, but I was starting to feel like a specimen under her microscope. The woman who had made me feel so understood and valued was beginning to feel like a stranger. Still, I pushed down my doubts. She loved me. She'd chosen to live with me, to share her dreams and ambitions. Whatever was making me uncomfortable was probably just my own insecurity, my tendency toward paranoia that Sarah had always criticized. I was probably imagining problems that didn't exist. Everything changed the day Kamalporn announced she had a meeting with a Bangkok publisher. She'd been secretive about her submissions process, but suddenly she was bursting with excitement. "River Books wants to meet about my novel," she told me over breakfast. "It's a major opportunity." She needed to look professional, she said, and asked for money to buy appropriate clothes and cover transportation costs. I gave her 15,000 baht without hesitation. If this was her big break, I wanted to support her completely. She was gone all day, returning that evening practically glowing with success. "They love it," she announced, throwing her arms around me. "They want to fast-track publication." She showed me a business card with Thai text and a contract written entirely in Thai script that I couldn't read. Over dinner, she described her novel as a cross-cultural love story about an American oil worker finding redemption through love in Bangkok. My heart swelled with pride. Our relationship, our love, would be immortalized in literature. "The publisher wants more authentic detail about American working-class trauma," she continued. "He says that's what will make it marketable internationally." So I spent the evening giving her exactly what she asked for. I told her about my mother's slow death from lung cancer, about the financial strain that nearly bankrupted us. I described the shame I felt when Sarah criticized my lack of ambition, when she said I was settling for mediocrity by staying in oilfield work. I shared my deepest insecurities, my fear that I was fundamentally unlovable, my terror of dying. alone and forgotten. Camelporn recorded every word, her eyes bright with what I interpreted as creative excitement. "This is gold," she kept saying. "Absolute gold." Later that night, as she typed furiously while I tried to sleep, I felt a strange mixture of pride and vulnerability. I'd given her my most painful memories, my most shameful moments. She was transforming them into art, giving meaning to suffering that had felt pointless for so long. I fell asleep to the sound of her keyboard, dreaming of seeing our love story. In bookstores around the world, the inconsistencies started small. Camelporn would mention different names for her editor. Sometimes it was Kun Somchai, sometimes Kun Narong. The business card she'd shown me looked cheaply printed when I examined it more closely. When I asked to meet her editor or visit the publisher's office, she'd make excuses about him being too busy or the office being in renovation. She needed more money for manuscript formatting and translation services, always small amounts. 2,000 baht here, 3,000 there. The amounts weren't significant enough to refuse, but they were adding up. I gave her what she asked for, but my doubt was growing into something harder to ignore. The breaking point came when I found the printed pages. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. I was looking for my reading glasses in her dresser drawer when my fingers touched a stack of papers hidden under her clothes. They were in English, and I immediately recognized fragments of our conversations embedded in dialogue. My hands shook as I read. The protagonist was clearly based on me, but he wasn't the complex, sympathetic character I'd imagined. He was pathetic, desperate, a lonely American man being manipulated by a clever Thai woman who saw right through his neediness. The descriptions cut deep. Jake's desperate need for validation made him easy to manipulate. He was so hungry for someone to find. Him interesting that he'd believe any lie that made him feel special. The female character, Nim, was portrayed as calculating but sympathetic, a survivor using the American man's loneliness for her own advancement. I read scene after scene that mirrored our relationship exactly, but twisted through a lens that made me look foolish, and her look coldly strategic. My blood ran cold when I reached a chapter describing Jake's sexual desperation, his pathetic gratitude for any attention from a younger woman. It was all true, and that made it so much worse. When Camelporn returned from her errands that afternoon, I was waiting with the pages spread across our kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said quietly. The look on her face told me everything. I needed to know. She wasn't surprised I'd found them. If anything, she looked relieved. Camelporn didn't deny anything when confronted with the pages. Instead, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and began explaining with a calm that was somehow more disturbing than anger would have been. "Yes, you're the inspiration for Jake," she said, her voice steady despite the tears starting to form in her eyes. "But he's not just you. He's elevated, made into a complex literary character." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "For you've been writing about me this whole time? Our entire relationship was research?" She reached across the table, but I pulled my hands away. "It's more complicated than that," she insisted. "I needed a story that would sell, something authentic, that Western publishers would take seriously. You needed to feel important, valued. We both got what we wanted." The cold analysis of our relationship left me speechless. She continued, explaining that there had never been a publisher meeting, never been a Bangkok editor giving feedback. She'd been submitting the novel online to international literary agents, using our relationship as research for authentic Western male psychology. She showed me her laptop screen, dozens of rejection emails from agents and publishers in New York, London, Sydney. "They all say the same thing," she explained, scrolling through the messages. "They love the concept, the cross-cultural angle, but they want more emotional depth from the male protagonist. That's why I needed more personal stories from you, more trauma, more authentic pain." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Every intimate conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every story I'd shared about my childhood or divorce, all of it had been material for her novel. "You used me," I said, but my voice came out as a whisper rather than an accusation. "We used each other," she corrected. You got to feel like someone's muse, someone important. I got the authentic material I needed for my novel. Neither of us was completely honest about what we wanted. I realized I'd been a character in her novel from our very first conversation in that bar. The American man so desperate for connection that he'd never question why an intelligent, beautiful woman found his boring life so fascinating. She'd seen me coming from across that crowded room. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I asked to read the complete manuscript. Camel Pawn hesitated, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once you read it, you can't unknow what I wrote about you." I nodded, though my stomach was already churning with dread. She turned the laptop toward me, and I spent the next 3 hours reading 300 pages of devastating psychological accuracy. Jake was every bit as lonely, desperate, and self-deceptive as I'd feared, but he was also written with a strange compassion that confused me. Camel Pawn hadn't just captured my flaws, she'd understood my genuine pain, the way divorce had shattered my confidence, leaving me feeling disposable and forgotten, how 30 years of physical labor had worn down my body and spirit, making me feel like machinery that was breaking down. The profound loneliness that had driven me to Thailand in the first place, searching for something I couldn't articulate. Nim was calculating but not evil. She was survival smart, using what she had, intelligence, beauty, cultural knowledge, to build a better life. The novel showed her internal conflicts too, moments where she questioned her own ethics, where she genuinely cared for Jake despite her ulterior motives. The love scenes between Jake and Nim were tender and realistic, clearly based on our actual intimacy. Camel Pawn had paid attention to every detail, every whispered word, every moment of connection we'd shared. By the end of the novel, Jake realizes he's been used, but also acknowledges that he'd used Nim too, for validation, for feeling young again, for escaping his American failures. The novel's ending showed Jake returning to Oklahoma changed, not destroyed, understanding something true about himself for the first time in years. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. "Well?" Camel Pawn asked finally. "What do you think?" I didn't know whether to feel violated or understood. She'd held up a mirror that showed me truths about myself I'd never been able to see clearly. It was brutal and honest and somehow loving all at once. Over the next several days, Camel Pawn and I had the most brutally honest conversations of our entire relationship. She explained that everything between us had been real, the sex, the companionship, even genuine moments of affection, but it had also been material for her art. "I'm not a sociopath," she insisted, as we sat on our balcony overlooking Bangkok's evening traffic. "I didn't fake everything, but I also didn't waste anything. Every experience became part of the story. She needed to support herself while writing, and I needed to feel valued after my divorce. We used each other," she said simply, "but we also helped each other. That's what most relationships are if people are honest about it." She showed me the latest rejection letter from a New York agent who had praised the psychological realism of the male protagonist, but suggested the ending needed more emotional resolution. "The agent thinks Jake's transformation isn't complete enough," Camel Pawn explained. "She wants to see him more changed by the experience." Then she asked the question that floored me, "Will you help me improve the final chapters, to make Jake's growth more authentic?" Part of me was horrified by the request. She wanted me to help her make my own fictional humiliation more convincing, but another part of me was oddly proud. My life, messy and painful as it was, had become art. Not great art, maybe, but something real and honest that might touch other people's lives. "What would I get out of it?" I asked. "Besides being a better character in your novel?" Camel Pawn promised to share any profits from publication and offered to change physical details and names to protect my privacy. "But the emotional truth has to stay," she insisted. "That's what makes it powerful." I was torn between anger at being deceived and admiration for her ambition and skill. She'd accomplished something I never could, transforming raw experience into something meaningful. "I need time to think," I told her. But deep down, I already knew what my answer would be. I spent a week walking around Bangkok, processing everything that had happened between us. I rode the BTS to the end of every line, sat in temple courtyards watching monks go about their daily rituals, drank coffee in shopping malls, and tried to understand my own feelings. The rational part of me knew I should be furious. I should throw camel porn out of my apartment and never speak to her again. She'd deceived me, used my deepest vulnerabilities for her own advancement, turned our intimacy into material for public consumption. But the truth was more complicated than anger. She had given me something I desperately needed, even if she was simultaneously taking from me. For 4 months I'd felt seen, understood, important. Yes, she'd been studying me like a research subject, but she'd also been living with me, sleeping with me, sharing her dreams and ambitions. She'd created something beautiful from my broken pieces. I thought about my ex-wife, Sarah, who'd dismissed my stories as boring, who'd made me feel invisible even when we were in the same room. Sarah had known me for 35 years, but had never really listened to me the way camel porn had in just a few months. Camel porn had found value in experiences Sarah considered worthless. She'd transformed my pain into art, given meaning to suffering that had felt pointless for years. When I returned to our apartment, camel porn was at her laptop as usual, but she looked up when I entered. "I've been thinking too," she said before I could speak, "about what I owe you for this." "I'll help you finish the novel," I said, sitting down across from her. "But I have conditions." She nodded, waiting. "I want to understand your story too, not just as background for your character, but really understand what drove you to this, what your life was like before you met me." She agreed immediately, and we spent that evening with the roles reversed. She told me about growing up poor in Udon Thani, about her father's gambling debts that kept the family in constant crisis, about coming to Bangkok at 18 with nothing, but intelligence and ambition, working restaurant jobs while going to university, about the literary scene that was dominated by men and foreigners, where Thai women were expected to write about prostitution and poverty to get international attention. Her story was as compelling as mine, and I realized the novel needed both perspectives to be truly complete. Working together to revise the manuscript was the strangest experience of my life. Camel Porn and I spent 2 weeks essentially rewriting our own relationship, making it more honest than it had ever been in reality. I helped her refine Jake's voice, making his internal monologue more authentic to how working-class American men actually think and speak. He wouldn't use words like discombobulated, I'd point out. He'd say thrown off or confused as hell. She helped me understand Nim's perspective, explaining cultural pressures and economic realities I'd never fully grasped. "In Thailand, a woman who isn't married by 30 is seen as a failure," she explained. "But if she's too successful, she threatens men. There's a very narrow space to exist in." We worked side by side at her laptop, debating word choices and emotional beats. I suggested scenes that showed Jake's gradual awareness of being used, his complex feelings about it. Not just anger, but also a strange gratitude for being seen so clearly, even if it hurt. She added moments where Nim questioned her own ethics, where she genuinely cared for Jake despite her ulterior motives. The process was intimate in a way our romantic relationship had never been. We were laying our souls bare, examining our motivations and flaws with surgical precision. The revised ending showed both characters changed by their encounter. Jake returning to Oklahoma with new self-awareness and genuine self-respect, while Nim using her literary success to build an independent life free from family obligations and cultural expectations. It wasn't a happy ending in any traditional sense, but it was a truthful one. When we finished the revisions, Camel Porn submitted the manuscript to 3 more agents she'd been researching. "Now we wait," she said. Within a month, we received an offer of representation from a literary agent in London who specialized in cross-cultural fiction. "The emotional authenticity is extraordinary," the agent wrote. "Both characters feel completely real and lived in." Camel Porn turned to me with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. For the first time, she said we. 6 months later, Bangkok Nights was published by Riverhead Books, a respected international publisher with offices in London and New York. The novel received positive reviews in several major publications, with critics praising its unflinching portrayal of modern relationship dynamics. and authentic cross-cultural perspective. The Guardian called it a brutally honest examination of how people use love to survive. I was listed in the acknowledgements as HM, whose stories made this book possible. Camel Porn split the modest advance with me as promised. $20,000 total, 10 for each of us. I used my portion to extend my visa and stay in Thailand for another year. The book didn't become a bestseller, but it found its audience. Expat forums buzzed with discussions about the novel, with men arguing about whether Jake was a victim or a willing participant in his own manipulation. Thai women's groups appreciated Nim's complexity, the way she was portrayed as intelligent and strategic rather than purely predatory. I started receiving messages through the publisher from readers who found the story meaningful, men who recognized their own experiences reflected in Jake's journey, who felt less alone in their struggles with loneliness and aging. Some were angry, calling the book a betrayal of Western men who come to Asia looking for love. Others were grateful for the honest portrayal of their struggles. "Your story helped me understand my own relationship," wrote one reader from Australia. "I realized I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for someone to make me feel important." Camel Porn handled all the publicity, giving interviews to newspapers and appearing on podcasts where she discussed the ethics of using real relationships as artistic material. She was always careful to protect my privacy while acknowledging my contribution. "The story couldn't exist without authentic male perspective," she told one interviewer. "But it also couldn't exist without understanding the Thai woman's position. Both characters are using each other, but they're also helping each other grow." The success felt surreal. My boring life had become literature. My pain had become art. That touched other people's lives. Camel Porn and I continued living together, but our relationship evolved into something I'd never experienced before. We were friends, collaborators, and occasional lovers, but no longer romantic partners in any traditional sense. The pretense was gone, replaced by a strange honesty that worked for both of us. She started working on her second novel, this one, about Thai women navigating Bangkok's literary scene. She'd ask for my perspective sometimes, but I also pursued my own interests. I enrolled in Thai language classes and started exploring parts of the country I'd never seen. The money from the ID book gave me freedom to travel without worrying about my budget. Camel Porn introduced me to her writer friends, and I became a minor figure in Bangkok's expat literary community. People knew me as the guy from the novel, and I was surprisingly comfortable with that identity. Some people viewed our living arrangement with suspicion or disapproval, but we didn't care. We'd both grown from our strange transaction. She'd become a published author, and I'd learned something important about myself and my capacity for change. Neither of us pretended it was a conventional love story, but it was real in its own, complicated way. Camel Porn started dating a Thai photographer named Chai, a gentleman who appreciated her ambition. I began a casual relationship with an Australian woman named Helen, who taught English at a local university. There was no jealousy between Camel Porn and me, just mutual respect for what we'd accomplished together. We're probably the only ex-lovers who collaborated on a novel about our breakup, Camel Porn joked one evening as we shared dinner on our balcony. "It's very postmodern." I laughed, realizing she was right. We'd found a way to transform betrayal into art, loneliness into understanding. It wasn't the love story I'd thought I wanted, but it was the story I'd needed to live. A year after publication, I'm still in Bangkok, still trying to fully understand what happened between Camel Porn and me. I've read Bangkok Nights 5 times now, and each reading reveals something new about both of us. She captured truths about my character that I couldn't see myself. My desperate need for validation, my tendency to romanticize relationships to avoid dealing with reality. But she also showed my resilience, my capacity for growth, qualities I'd forgotten I possessed. The novel became a mirror that forced me to confront uncomfortable truths while also revealing hidden strengths. I'm different now than when I first arrived in Thailand 18 months ago. More self-aware, less desperate for approval, more comfortable with complexity and ambiguity. I understand now that most relationships involve some level of mutual use, people coming together, because they need something from each other. The difference is usually just how honest everyone is about it. Kamalporn achieved her dream of international publication and is working on her third book, a collection of interconnected stories about love and survival in modern Bangkok. We still have coffee together occasionally, discussing writing, relationships, the strange journey we took together. Sometimes Helen joins us, and the three of us make an odd little family of sorts. "Do you regret it?" Kamalporn asked me recently. "Any of it?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I don't regret it," I said finally. "I know I was used, but I also know I used you too, for validation, for feeling young again, for escaping my failures back home. Maybe being used isn't always a bad thing if both people grow from the experience. My story became her art, but her art also became my education. She taught me something important about myself, about my capacity for change and adaptation. I learned that being seen clearly, even when it's unflattering, is better than being invisible. In the end, we both got what we needed, just not in the way either of us had expected. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about people staying together forever. Sometimes they're about people helping each other become who they need to be, then having the courage to let each other go.